Hi, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Caitlin Orbanek. I'm with the Whole Child Connection at Children's Institute, and today I'm joined by a group of experts to talk about fostering positive connection among children, families, and school staff during some stressful times of COVID, during some stressful times of social justice in our country, and I would like to invite my panel to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Sierra Fisher. I am a project coordinator with the Whole Child Connection at Children's Institute.
Hi everybody, I'm Deb Salamone and I'm a senior consultant with Coordinated Care Services.
And hi, my name is Erick Stevens. I'm a parent engagement specialist at Common Ground Health.
So thank you all so much for joining me. What we wanted to start out with talking about is the power of positive relationships and how adults can foster physical and emotional and mental safety for young people in their learning spaces, now that so many of those spaces may look or feel a little bit different. Before we get into it, it's worth acknowledging that so many learning spaces are now online. So is anything in your experience different about creating safe spaces when they're virtual?
When I think about our virtual spaces, I think it feels overwhelming at first because we think that's not how I normally connect with people. And yet I want to really emphasize that teachers and school staff have amazing skills for connecting with students. And one of the messages I've been sending to staff straight through since we've been out of school and returning to school is fall back into those skills that you know you have. And we can easily forget when we're overwhelmed that we know how to do things and we do this well. And I've been in education and worked with educators for over 20 years and you guys got this. You know how to connect with students. And so I want to say, ask yourself, what is it that I normally do in a regular start of a school year to know my students? How do I get to know who they are and what their passions or their likes and strengths are? And how can that just be tweaked a little bit for online learning? And I imagine that you're going to find out that, oh, I do have this, right? I know how to build a relationship with a child or with a colleague. So just that remembering that you have those skills within you already.
I completely agree with what Deb said. I also think that they're similar to being in the classroom, honoring boundaries. The same applies to virtual spaces. So I feel like what we're finding right now is, and some viewers may agree with this, the disconnect with students. They are on the other side of the screen. They may not even have their camera on. So similar to how we honor boundaries in the classroom, have that same sort of grace as we navigate the virtual space. So I know some students may not feel comfortable showing their background. So maybe taking some time at the start of the school year to teach students how to upload safe and appropriate backgrounds, have competitions where guess my background or guess the country my background is from, to just sort of elevate play while honoring those boundaries that we would expect to have had in the classroom as well.
Yeah, and then, I would third that. Teachers definitely teachers are just amazing. And I'm always amazed at how innovative and creative and thoughtful teachers are. And I think this is a real opportunity to express your creativity and also do that just understanding just this difficult time that we're going through, that there could be legitimate reasons, as mentioned, why people's cameras are off, and not taking that as an attack or not wanting to participate, but like take it as an opportunity to better understand your students.
Those were all excellent points, Eric, and I love how you landed on that idea of better understanding students, because I think that that's really the foundation of what positive connection looks like. From my perspective. So from your perspective, what do those positive connections look like for children of different ages and across those different kinds of maybe peer-to-peer child relationships? And can you tell me a little bit more about what that might look like? And then what are some strategies for building positive connection, and what should we keep in mind?
I'd like to start with just one thing that I think would be helpful to norm. So virtual, in person, whatever that looks like, norming shared agreements for spaces where youth and adults, youth are, all of us are. So really developing and building those safe spaces, fostering those safe spaces through student voice. So early on, developing a contract or a shared agreement where we are all coming together to identify how this space will look, what it would look like over time, what it sounds like, what it feels like, what it should, as I said, what it should look like. So really starting with shared agreements to norm how to foster safe spaces and sort of norm those safe spaces.
And to jump in on that as well, I think when you have those norms established and you come to them every day. And so a big piece about working with our students who return to us, if they're returning with prior trauma or grief or loss from this pandemic and are bringing that into our spaces with us, when you have normed that and you consistently go back to those norms, you show up every day and you create those safe spaces by having those norms actually is what is creating that safe space. As a student, I know what to expect, and that's across from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. If I know what's going to happen when I come into this classroom space, whether I'm in person or online, then that lowers my anxiety, which makes me then better able to learn. And that's really what the goal is with creating a safe space, so that students' anxiety comes down and then they're able to learn.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. Like, I love the concept of safe space. And I think with that, we need to keep what's going on with the pandemic like in mind when we think about safe space. As we all know, like violence is on a rise in this city and cities across the country, and a lot of it is due to the stress of the pandemic, being isolated, just the feeling of uncertainty. So with that concept of safe space, let's just keep that in mind, that safe space could change each day, and just us being flexible and teachers being flexible, students being flexible. I just think that's really an important thing for us to all keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that point. I think Sierra said it earlier, that idea of providing grace to others. And I think that's what, Erick is also acknowledging, that people are bringing a myriad of emotions to us every time that they come into our classrooms. And we, at the same time as the adult, are also bringing our own stuff, right, to those classroom spaces. And so how do we acknowledge different emotions? They're all okay to have. How do we name them for our students? When we name those emotions for them, that also helps to lower their anxiety. And then also have grace, so that if you're having a bad day or something happened that was heightening for you last night or this morning, how do we handle that and say, we're still all okay, we're gonna be here and be okay. Let's talk through that. Or let's just say you're angry. That's okay. Take some deep breaths. And you can even model that for our kids. How do we regulate ourselves when we're heightened? I love the idea of showing grace and not jumping to conclusions. Yeah.
Sorry, Deb. Yeah, I mean, just thinking too, like, we can't talk about, there's so much going on in 2020, not only the pandemic, not only the learning environment being drastically changed, also like there is a huge movement going on around race and respect of cultures, and students are living that in their neighborhood, seeing police, seeing protesters, witnessing violent confrontations. Like, we really need to just keep that all in mind with that. I mean, I just don't think I just think it's so important that we also bring that into this conversation, that 2020 has been a year like no other, with challenges for communities, parents, children, administrators, teachers, people even having jobs. All of these things are going to factor into the learning environment. So I think acknowledging that students are going through this, I think helps build that connection and trust between teachers, school, and families.
Yeah. Hey, I want to bounce off something that all of you have kind of touched on, which is that idea of grief, or just the experience of loss that we may be feeling right now, and just echo something that I've been hearing in my own personal life and reading, that sometimes when we use words like grief and loss, we think of maybe some of us have lost loved ones to the pandemic. Maybe some of us have experienced personal harm when we're, out in our communities, emotional harm. And another thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that the idea of grieving the loss of what you expected for this year, what a student may have expected for their senior year of high school, or what a parent may have expected for their child's first day of kindergarten, and that being different than our expectation is a very real kind of grief. And it's something that so many people are going to be juggling day to day, let alone throughout this fall, winter, into next year.
Yeah, you know what? I'll just also add to it. It's really good that you touched on that, because I'm going to also go back to the pandemic. I think of my own family where we've lost two grandparents and also a family friend, and so many of our students, like, grandparents play such a critical role in their development, whether it's watching them or picking them up from school. And when we think about the Rochester City School District, which is the largest district in our area, and knowing that the pandemic adversely affected Black and Brown people at like a higher rate, just respecting the loss or the potential loss that students may have dealt with, I think empathy goes a long way. And I'm sure later we'll talk about building strong relationships. But when you show empathy to others, this is just a real opportunity to build a bridge that will last for the rest of the time that you know them. And just really thinking about that, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, Eric, that's a perfect segue. I was just going to ask, what are your strategies? How do you, when we say it's so important to build positive connections, I don't think that anyone disagrees with that, but it's the how, and how to do that in maybe some different environments, or how to do that when people are feeling a little bit different. So the idea of starting with empathy is an excellent one. And I wonder, Deb and Sierra and Eric, if you all have more strategies that we can talk about.
So I'd like to share one that I did the other day with a group of young people, high school students, but I believe, and I firmly believe, that this activity can be done with the littles as well. The prompt was that I offered to the students was, if you could create the perfect recipe for a relationship, or a relationship pie was a play on words, what would the key ingredients be, and how much of each ingredient would you incorporate? So an example would be 1 cup of trust, a pinch of laughter, things like that. So while this was fun and playful, and the students really leaned into it, it gave me an idea of what they value, especially as they associated measurements to it. So if there were like 3 cups of humor or 3 cups of communication, I knew that that was something that was important to the students, and I needed to find ways to incorporate that in our interactions.
Yeah, I think mine would start with about six cups of love would be would be what I would want in my pie. I think that's a great tool. I might steal that. I just love that. I mean, I try to think, like, what if we treated everyone with the kindness that we treat, like, our moms or our siblings? The golden rule is to treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated. And if we did that, there'd be so less conflict. But some strategies I use, like, now they're non-virtual strategies, but eventually we're going to go back to a regular format. So in a lot of schools in the Rochester City School District, I created these informal coffee hours. So within the city of Rochester limits, there's only 2 Starbucks. There's one downtown and one on Mount Hope. One is in a more affluent neighborhood, and one is in also a more affluent neighborhood. So many of the parents I serve, there isn't a Starbucks on the corner where you can go to and just meet a friend. And so I would bring a couple of jugs of coffee, some bagels, and set up in the cafeteria. And as parents drop their kids off, I would usher them in. And a lot of times they would be in a rush. I would say, I'm sure you can just give me just 10 minutes. Just come have a coffee or a bagel or some oranges. And they would come in and they'd end up staying 30 or 40 minutes. And then they would end up talking to other parents. And then the administrators would come in. Now, when the administrators would come in, I had a rule with them. No principal talk. I don't want to hear about Common Core, test scores, little Tommy acting out. This is a free space. I want principals in there, but I want them in there to just get to know parents and not scare parents off. Although all the principals were well-meaning, when principals go into principal talk, a lot of parents, even myself, can just shut it off. So I really helped establish these informal coffee hours. So once a month, we had our own little Starbucks at school 2, at school 12, at school 58, and countless other schools where parents could just come in, and for some stayed for a few minutes, some stayed for 30 minutes. Sometimes the language got a little coarse, and I had to remind them that we were in schools. But it was just free space where we just laughed and we talked, and it helped build relationships. Like, my goal was that I wanted parents to feel comfortable in their child's school, which they should, and I know that's going to lead to them volunteering, which it did, or would lead to them joining the PTA or PTO, which it did. But just making sure that parents feel welcomed in the building, I think, is a lost art. And I would also often try to get the secretaries to come and be a part of that too, because secretaries are the gatekeeper of the building, and they're really task oriented. And so getting them to soften up a little and get to know the parents in a different mindset, can really help improve a school's culture.
Yeah, there's no reason we can't do that kind of thing online. Host those, informal coffee hours and invite those people in. And I know that we're all going to need that come winter, when we're feeling even more trapped in our houses or our homes. A little bit of time to just chat with the people who are experiencing the same things as us is an excellent idea, Eric.
Can I just add to piggyback off of what Eric said, that another strategy that I think could be applicable to the classroom, be it virtual or in person, is this idea of a chat cafe. So it's almost identical to Eric's example, where we're just being in community, but to modify this to a classroom setting, sort of set up your space as sort of this cafe kind of environment, and have this menu where students populate the questions that are discussed, or you start to model that and have different questions. If one example, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, what is your favorite holiday and why? So really, students are just mixing and mingle and selecting from this menu of questions. And just to Eric's point, being in community, just connecting with one another, that really elevates students' relationship skills, their self-awareness skills, and it's fun. They're just hanging out and talking, which we know they love to do. So what works for adults, I think, is just as important to mirror that for children, and vice versa.
And a piece of that, I love both of those strategies, by the way. I love the idea of Starbucks at your school. And how do we build that also for our kids in a virtual setting too, is that like the culmination is when we're taking that time and space. And I get it. I was never a classroom teacher, but as an educator in a school, I taught in classrooms and was a school counselor, and your days are so packed full. And I often felt like I didn't have time to really hear or see or listen to people that were in front of me. And so when we're taking that space and time, like Sarah suggested, and allowing kids to come up with the types of questions or things they want to know about their peers, parents are coming in and we are really genuinely present, we're actually pouring into their wells of resiliency. And I like to think about it as like a well, and we're filling it up. And we're also doing the same for ourselves, because when we are firming up those connections, we're also making our resiliency grow as well. And that makes it easier then for students to engage in academics. Easier because they're feeling connected, they're feeling safe, and then learning can happen. And so that time that you spend connecting with kids and having your kids connect with each other in your classrooms and your virtual time pays off in the long run for all of you around social emotional health and well-being, but also because that resiliency, I can't say it enough or emphasize it enough, really makes them more ready to learn the academic piece. They feel safe with you, and they're going to be engaged in what you're teaching them. And it could be as simple as we check in the morning. Are you thumbs up or thumbs down? A quick thing into their little chat. Like if you were the weather today, are you sunny, cloudy? Are you rainy? Are you sleety? Like what's going on for you, right? And so it doesn't have to be a long time that you're spending on it, but something so that kids know you are caring about them and having a chance for them to connect with you first thing in the day.
Yeah, I love that. I'll definitely make sure on this video to link into some many different resources and tools and thoughts that we've had for some of those strategies and explanations and instructions for others all around that positive connection. But the starting points that you guys have given us are really strong. So we've talked a lot about student-teacher relationships, giving students time to form relationships with each other. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about maybe some other stakeholder groups in our learning spaces that we can't forget and how we can forge connections with those groups as well.
I'll jump in, and I know that Eric has some really good ideas for this, so I'm going to be really short and sweet because I wanted to just emphasize, and in one of the messages I've been sending out to staff that I've been working with, is that oftentimes the messaging in our world or our communities is that schools have to do everything. And we all know that that's not sustainable. We can't do and be everything for everyone, and yet we actually don't have to, because our communities have so many amazing people within them that are either in formal organizations or in informal connections that support neighbors, support other community members. And I think we need to really capture that because, again, it's not sustainable for schools to do everything. We can't. And we are also trying to teach academics, right? So when we fall onto our community partners and connect with them and collaborate, we're stronger, and we know that they're lifting up our students and families as well. So not to lose sight that it's important to have those relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Just reaching out. I really liked how you touched, Deb, on community partners. I started a mentorship group at School 12, and I partnered with a local Rochester business that makes chemicals, and you would never think that these guys would be interested in coming in. But I convinced them to come in and give me the whole year, and we mentored fifth graders for an entire year.
I like
And
that.
we did different sessions on like hygiene, media, and these were all boys. We did a session on talking to a girl,
Right.
dealing with conflict on the
Sure.
playground, importance of wearing a tie, just all of these things. And the boys which were primarily minority, the men that were all white, the way they just came together naturally, and the boys loved the guys loved the boys. And so you're exactly right. Like, we have to ask our community partners. They're interested. They want to be a part of this, and they're looking for opportunities to do more than just sit at a desk and calculate numbers or come up with formulas for chemicals. They're looking for opportunities to just interact. Also, like, a key group I work with is parents. Parents often are not treated like the experts that they are, and it's important for us to acknowledge that. Parents know the children better than anyone else, and just acknowledging that, I think, goes a long way. And I've done a lot really lately around marginalized fathers, which are Black and brown dads, in a school district like the Rochester City School District, which the teachers are 85% white female, and bringing those two groups together to help ease the friction, and for them for each one of those groups to really see themselves as partners. There's so much data behind the success of children when dads are involved. So it's important for us, for those educators, for the community partners like me, or for like Deb and Sierra, to be able to show schools the importance of engaging with dads.
How about that? Eric, I know there's a specific program that you use when you work with fathers. What was that program?
So the program is called All Pro Dads. It was Tony Dungy, who is an NFL player and coach who led the Colts to a Super Bowl under Peyton Manning, for those football fans out there. He's a big family person, and like, he wanted to help establish a program that brought dads and children and schools together. And why I love All Pro Dads, for so many reasons. One of the main reasons is that we come together once a month for breakfast and a workshop. But the workshop takes place primarily with the dad and the dad's own children. So you have a series of questions you're asking. The topic might be about the importance of friendships. So the first question the kid might say, Dad, can you tell me a time where you had a friend that you realized that you really couldn't be friends with them anymore? And then it gets the dad to open up, and then the dad will have might ask a question, Tony, can you tell me a time where you had a friend that you were really thankful that was in your life? And so it helps establish this relationship between the dad and the children, and they get talking about real issues that they should be talking about, but in a format that's just soft and gentle. So I love that. My favorite part of All Pro Dads is that the way every dad starts every meeting, you have to get up and stand up and acknowledge your children. So I'm gonna pretend to do a session, but I won't stand up. I would say I am so proud of Deb. For those of you that don't know, Deb's my daughter. She's 9, and we look exactly alike. Deb is just doing so much at home. I started a new job. I started a second job, and I'm working more hours. So Deb is like picking up around the house. She's making sure that her siblings are at the table reading and doing their homework. And I couldn't take on a second job for the family if it wasn't for Deb, what Deb is doing. And you would just see Deb just light up. She's staring at her dad while her dad is standing in front of this whole group of other dads and praising her. And it warms your heart. And it makes me think as a parent of the times where I'm tough on my own son about getting an 82 and being disappointed. And then my son is like, but Dad, I got a 93 on another test. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, you should have gotten a 93. Well, if I'm going to point out the 82 that I'm not pleased with, it's more important that I point out the 92 that I am pleased with. So it's a reminder for dads to just give your children like acknowledgement when they're doing well. So at some schools like School 43, we have almost 50 dads every month. And there was a new principal at 43 who was unsure about this group, and he came down, and his principal was like, in my 20 years of education, I've never seen a group of 50 dads every single month come here. Dads want to be involved. We just have to give them the opportunity to get involved. And then those dads being involved, again, it led to them being on school-based planning team. We had a project at 43 where the New York State Department of Transportation was redesigning the roadway and the way it would come in with the school. Dads wanted to be a part of that because they wanted to know how cars were going to come in where their kids are waiting for the bus. It just led to dads being involved in all kinds of ways. And I've started those in about 6 schools, and in every school they're thriving. School 12 had close to 70 dads come to a meeting, and one dad came from New York City, and he came because his son asked him to come. He drove from New York City. Then another dad planned the week before. He came in extra for 5 days and did like 30 minutes extra so that following Monday, the dad could come into work an hour late because he wanted to be there. We just have to give them the space and the opportunity and let them know that they're welcome in our buildings. And it just helps build this community, which we're all talking about.
Yeah, I think that there's so much to be said for making sure that those opportunities are culturally appropriate, culturally humble. It's so nice to know that programs like All Pro Dads and some others exist in the world that are structured and already ready to go, and all we have to do is kind of follow some directions. Nobody's asking us to invent things from the ground up. So that's really that's
yeah, that's what I love about All Pro Dads. It's only $50 for the curriculum for a whole year, for all 10 months. It's in Spanish and English. It's already developed. So sometimes you think, gosh, okay, we talked about like knowing how your kids are doing in school, but what are we going to talk about next month? It's already done. And if there's a school out there that's interested that doesn't have $50 to help with that program, reach out to me. I'm sure I can find that $50 for you.
Not sponsored, we should say. Eric is just this enthusiastic about it. What about other stakeholder groups in the community? I know when we talk about social emotional learning, we talk about maybe our paraprofessionals, our custodial staff, our food service workers, our transportation staff, all the other adults in the sphere that our young people engage with. What are you guys' thoughts about making those positive connections with those kinds of stakeholder groups?
Well, I think it's so critical that any person within a school building can play an important role in a student's life, right? And you never know who that person is going to be for each child. And I always think there's definitely a person in those walls for each child that's there. And we would often, at my elementary building, connect us with our lead custodian, because those two hit it off. He would kind of mentor the student who had an opportunity to help out and feel like really successful with things and have strengths emphasized. It could be the front office person who is there every day greeting our kids and has those connections with them. We would have amazing TAs that were so funny and could connect with kids around humor, which I think we can't lose sight of, that having a sense of humor and being able to laugh and pull on things to make us feel good is also really important. So looking around, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person that you would think of all the time to make that connection with a student. It could be really any of us, and have the student say, he or she may already be connected and be able to tell you, I really want to see her in the cafeteria or him doing the grounds work, whatever those things may be, because one, it could involve their passion, but two, it's that person and it's that relationship that's been built that makes the difference.
I completely agree with Deb. I think my go-to has always been to ask the students who that adult is. And it may not even be, that person may not even be in the school. It could be an after school support staff. It could be a mentor. It could be someone from church. It could be a neighbor. So I think really starting with the students self-identifying who that person is. And I also love to hear why that's their person. What makes that person special? What is special about that relationship with the person? Again, peering into the mind of the child, where I'm starting to see what they identify as key components to their relationships. I had a conversation the other day with a bunch of young people, and I asked the same question, and a lot of them identified sports, like coaches and things like that, and after school staff that have served as mentors. And for a few of the young people, when I asked what made that relationship special, there's a number of things, but one big thing that came up was one young man said, he looks like me. There's no representation in my school. There's no representation in my classroom. And he gets me, he looks like me, we're from the same neighborhood. We connect in ways that I'm not connecting with my teacher. So I think that's important to identify. I think it's important to name that and have these open conversations with your students about any barriers.
And then I'll just add, for our coffee hours, I always invite the janitors in. I invite the lunch monitors in. Just a lot of times those work groups feel marginalized in the building, like they feel less than. And they play critical roles, like the janitors make sure that every table is clean, that it's safe to walk, that it smells good in our buildings. Like, those are important roles. I also invite the lunch monitors. That's a thankless job, and food service workers. I've done a lot of training with food service workers and lunch aides to help them get to feel more a part of the building and a more part of the culture. And we had a national trainer come in and tell them, you guys are teachers. You're teaching these students life skills, like how to be able to eat properly, how to conduct yourself in a setting where food and others. And they said, no one has ever told us that before. Like, we know this, but no one's ever told us that. So, like, there's a lot we can do as community partners in our work in buildings to help bridge that disconnect, maybe be between staff, that maybe the non-traditional school staff and the teachers as well as parents. So every opportunity I can to bring them into our fold, so we're all working together and we all feel like we're a team, I always try to do that, always.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the last things that I want to touch on is that I've heard so much about so many stresses that educators and program leaders and all of our other support staff are feeling right now, whether it's learning new teaching styles or that pressure to maybe play catch up after learning disruptions last spring and everything over the summer and now into the fall. So what advice do you have for leveraging relationships during stressful times? And what should we keep in mind about children's resilience?
Well, so I'm not sure if will be on topic, but I'm going to try to make it on topic. So I do a lot of work around infant early childhood mental health. That sounds very complex, but it's really about making sure children have nurturing, loving relationships from birth to through age 8, and the way that will help that child throughout life. So I'm working with early childhood educators, parents, and I'm presenting this complex term, infant early childhood mental health, which sounds like a little baby on Freud's couch, but it's not. Um, uh, and just try to just break it down into a way that anyone can understand. Whether you're a grandma, a grandpa, you're a preschool teacher, a kindergarten teacher, a second grade teacher, an administrator, a lunch monitor, it's critical that you understand the importance of being a loving, nurturing, supportive force for that child. And so the way I present it, I use Tupac, I use DMX, I use a lot of rappers that have been talking about infant early childhood mental health forever. They talk about the trauma that these kids are living in their neighborhoods every day. I live in the 19th ward. Last night at 7 p.m., a 12 and 13-year-old were stabbed in a fight on the corner of Charlie and Lincoln Avenue. A few days before that, there was a shooting on Charlotte Avenue. And last night I was driving through a neighborhood near Edgerton Park, and I saw some young people out standing by a memorial. And I pulled over, and I didn't know them, but I pulled over and said, "Hey, can you tell me what took place?" A 26-year-old friend of theirs was murdered there the night before. So there's trauma, and there was little children in the van just sitting as all those people were mourning the loss of someone that they loved. So just really knowing there's trauma every day for our children. And sometimes we're going to have to step outside of our comfort zone. I didn't know those people, but I got out of my car. I told them that my thoughts and prayers are with them. I'm so sorry. When they told me his age, I was like, wow, he was a baby. And they were heartbroken. They couldn't even respond. So we as community partners, as teachers, as social workers, counselors, we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zone. And I talked about this at the beginning, like show empathy, that you genuinely care. It doesn't matter if it's not our neighborhood. Like Edgerton is not my neighborhood, but I care about the people in Edgerton that lost their friend.
Thank you for sharing all that, Eric. Wow.
So I think what I'd like to contribute is, so when we are doing our best, we are working with our youth through a trauma-informed lens. We are working with our youth through a culturally responsive lens. We're doing the best that we can, but I still need to play catch up. I'm still needing to find ways to foster social emotional wellness into my content curriculum on top of everything else. So what do I do with that? I'm doing all the right things, but what do I do as far as practical strategies? So what I'd like to share is the 3 signature social emotional learning practices, which are welcoming rituals, engaging practices, and optimistic closures. So just if we can do anything else, we have these three pillars that we can view a 50-minute lesson, a 30-minute lesson, whatever that looks like. So what is a welcoming ritual? It's an activity for inclusion. One that I can give as an example is a 3-word story. So you're just about to start your lesson. Your welcoming ritual for the day is have students identify how their day is based on 3 words, how their week has been going, how their month has been going, whatever that may look like. So starting off with this grounding, inclusive, welcoming ritual. Okay, now I have to get to content, of course, because we're strapped for time. There's a lot of pressures. Engaging practices are sense making and brain breaks. And an example of that, which I love to use, is content bingo. So incorporate your content, key points, facts, whatever that may look like, quotes, into this sort of bingo board and have students follow that along. That it can be something you can do while you're teaching, but that incorporates play, it fosters social emotional learning, skill development, all of those things. And then finally, an optimistic closure is reflection. So at the end of the lesson, you've got 5 minutes left. have students pair up, group together, love it or leave it. I loved this part of class today. I'll leave this part out next time. And you're getting a sense as a teacher or support staff, whatever that may look like, what students are loving and what they'd rather not have be incorporated into the next class. So I don't want to simplify or make it seem, oh, it's just that simple. But if we sort of ground ourselves in our lessons in these three sort of pillars, a welcome, something engaging and playful in between, and an optimistic closure at the end, we can foster those social emotional skills while, you know, sort of moving through the content that continues to just build up over time.
I'm just gonna say that these ladies are wicked smart. They're so much smarter than me. I love it.
Oh.
I love it.
True. That's not true.
Oh, it is. I love it. I absolutely love it.
You know what? So I will also say, Eric, you bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise. Oh my gosh. So don't downplay that. I have learned a lot from just hearing you over the last couple of times we've been together. I will conclude with the idea of, I love what Sierra referenced around those three specific things that you can do, the playbook and those strategies, and that can be an attachment to this because it is something that you can reference. And then finally, really that idea of self-compassion, that ultimately we're all experiencing the pandemic and everything else that is falling out from it at the same time. And we're still in it, right? So it's not as if we're in recovery. It's not that it's done. It's still happening. And so how do we have compassion for ourselves on those days that maybe we're not rising to the level that we think we should as a classroom teacher or another type of educator within a building, and say, you know what, like, it's okay. I showed up today and that's enough, because I'm going to show up again tomorrow and I'm going to start all over again. And isn't that the grace that we are saying we give to others? How do we give it to ourselves? Because you show up consistently every day, whether you have a bomb of a day one day and you're awesome the next day, you're showing up. And that consistency and structure for our kids is what they need. And they know that when you show grace to yourself and give it to them, this is a safe place. I can come here and be safe. And ultimately, that's what we want for our students, right? Yeah. So know that you're enough and that you're doing enough. And I think as educators, it's a tough time and you're giving it your all. So I appreciate all of you.
Yeah, I'll just add too, like, I know I listed a lot of strategies and I made it sound easy, but I know it's not. And so I want to first put that out there. Just if you find one small thing of what I said, if you could try to apply that to your work as educators. If you need to reach out to me to talk about it, to talk about strategies, I'm always available and I love those opportunities. So I just want to make sure that that's known, that I know I just made it sound like it's so easy, but I know it's not. And I had a lot of bumps to find out what strategies would work the best.
Yes. Right.
And so find what little nuggets you can take out of it and apply to your work. And then I'm also always a resource. I don't want to speak for the other ladies, but I'm sure they feel the same way.
Sure.
Like, yeah. I'm always a resource that's available.
Thank you all so much.